Okay, Boker Tov, good to have you here with us, both in person and on Zoom. And we are slowly crawling our way back to normalcy, getting some more people in class, Baruch Hashem. And it's wonderful to have you no matter where you are, but it's even more wonderful to have you in person. So if you can be able to come and join us, that would be great. Okay. Last week, we explored the Medrash. We didn't finish the Medrash, but we explored the Medrash on David HaMelech. And in other words, Moshe, why did Moshe not know the answer to this question? Rashi said the reason Moshe didn't know the answer to this question is because he was punished. Moshe was punished. This is a question that anybody should know. Right? You know, that you don't have to be, the daughters of Tzalafchad figured it out halachically. So it's something that Moshe Rabbeinu, certainly Moshe Rabbeinu of all people should have known. So the Medrash suggests that the reason Moshe Rabbeinu did not know it is because he was punished. Why was he punished? He was punished because he said, V'hadavar hakashe yaviu elai, right? That matter which is too difficult for you should be brought to me. We mentioned this was consistent with Yisro's approach, set up lower courts, and then Moshe Rabbeinu made that statement, which on the surface could be understood, but since it had a little bit of a tinge of haughtiness or arrogance, so Moshe Rabbeinu was punished. Okay. The other example that the Medrash brings of someone who was punished for this tinge of haughtiness or arrogance was the case of David HaMelech. The David HaMelech was punished when? So David HaMelech, if you remember, the Medrash said, David HaMelech said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your chukim are like zmiros to me, right? Your chukim are like zmiros to me, meaning that they're as familiar to me as songs. Okay, they're as familiar to me as songs. The HaKadosh Baruch said, okay, that's how you treat my laws. You consider yourself as familiar with them. They're as familiar to you as songs. Okay, I'm going to make sure that you transgress, stumble, fall short in a manner that even a school child knows. And what was that? So then we discussed the whole incident of the return of the ark. The ark had been captured by the Plishtim. You remember in this battle, the ark had been captured by the Plishtim. The Plishtim ultimately deduced that their afflictions correctly came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the fact that they were in possession of this ark that was holy and was not supposed to be among them. And they sent this ark back to the Jews, right? Fascinating story, by the way, of how they made this decision, because you're among the Plishtim. So how do you know, being among the Plishtim, how do you know whether or not these afflictions are afflictions that are due to the ark? Maybe it's COVID, right? Maybe it's a pandemic. Who knows? How do you know that these are afflictions that are because of the ark? So they had a very interesting, their wise people, right? Their advisors came up with a very interesting approach. What would they do? They would take two nursing cows who had never before borne the yoke of being attached to a wagon, and they would take these two nursing cows, hook them up to this wagon, and see what would happen. Now, what was their svara? What were they thinking? They were thinking that nursing cows are not going to leave their young behind, right? So obviously, if these cows start to leave, that's something that's going against their instincts, which they attributed to must be divine intervention. And additionally, cows who are not accustomed to being yoked to a wagon, those are generally oxen that are yoked to a wagon. These cows would nevertheless go ahead and be able to pull this wagon. So that would be yet another indication of what? Yet another indication that this was divinely ordained. And that's precisely what the Plishtim did. The wagon containing the Aron Kodesh led by these two nursing cows, traveled to Beit Shemesh. Right? That's where that was the closest community to where the Pelishtim were, and they sent the wagon, they sent the cows, and they went to Beit Shemesh. Okay, wonderful. They came to Beit Shemesh. The people in Beit Shemesh who were out in the fields were thrilled to see the ark being returned. Right? So they took the ark, they set the ark up on a large rock that was in the field. They actually slaughtered the cows as karbanos, right? Because at that point you could bring karbanos out. There was no centralized location. You could bring karbanos. So they did that. And these cows became the karbanos, and the ark was returned. What happened? Interestingly, the Psukim in Shmuel tell us that the people of Beit Shemesh, despite the fact that they were overjoyed at the return of the Aron Kodesh, the people in Beit Shemesh didn't properly respect the Aron Kodesh. And they tried to peek inside to see what was it. I mean, this was a big deal, right? Like, who wouldn't do that, right? The Aron Kodesh, right? This Aron Kodesh, which is usually hidden in a Kodesh HaKodashim. This Aron Kodesh is on a big rock in a field, right, in Beit Shemesh. So the people didn't treat it respectfully enough. And what happened? And there was a plague that killed thousands of people in Beit Shemesh. And the people in Beit Shemesh now were terrified that they were being killed because they had, just like the Pelishtim were punished because they had the ark, so too the people of Beit Shemesh, maybe we're being punished because we have the Aron Kodesh. So what did they do? So they sent to the community of Kiryas Yereim. Anybody know that community, Kiryas Yereim? You all know it, by the way. Kiryas Yereim. You all see the sign when you drive from Ben Gurion to Yerushalayim.
That's where Ephraim lives.
Ephraim, correct. Sonia Mopsis is correct. Rosie, are you still in Israel? I'm not sure it's Rosie's here or in Israel. Rosie, where are you?
Yes.
You're here?
Yes, I'm in Israel.
You're in Israel. Okay, so Rosie can corroborate for us. I'm not sure where she is, but Sonia Mopsis is absolutely true. Where is Kiryas Yereim? It's known as Tellstone. Right? It is Tellstone.
Rabbi.
Yes, Sonia.
The mayor there has now changed the name to Kiryat Yerim.
Kiryat, no longer Tellstone? Okay. All right, Baruch Hashem. Anyway, so from Beit Shemesh to Kiryas Yereim, that's where the Aron Kodesh went. The people from Kiryas Yereim came down, and they took the Aron Kodesh and they brought the Aron Kodesh back to their community. So they treated the Aron Kodesh very respectfully, and nothing happened to them. Nothing happened to them. Whose house did it wind up in Kiryas Yereim? It wound up in the house of Avinadav, right? Avinadav, and he watched the Aron Kodesh there in his house. His son Elazar was sort of in charge of watching this, and ultimately David HaMelech chose to move the Aron Kodesh to Yerushalayim. To move the Aron Kodesh to Yerushalayim. So if you think about it, the Aron Kodesh is moving east, right? Because if you're coming from Ben Gurion, just to put this in a perspective that many of us might be familiar with, if you're driving from Ben Gurion, first you come to the intersection that will take you to Beit Shemesh. Subsequently, you come you pass by Kiryas Yereim, and then only if you continue further to the east do you get to Yerushalayim. So David HaMelech is bringing the Aron Kodesh back. And what does David HaMelech do? He sends for the Aron Kodesh to be brought back, and the Aron Kodesh is brought back on a wagon, and it is led by, it is accompanied by two of the children of Avinadav. Right? One of them, what were their names? One of them, Uzzah, Uzzah, and Uzzah was the one who walked alongside the wagon, and the other one was Achio, and Achio was the one who led the wagon. Okay, very nice. They're coming back, and what happens? Okay, so we have this idea, right, that the Aron Kodesh is about to topple, the wagon slips, whatever it was. According to the Medrash, the Aron Kodesh elevated itself because that's how the Aron Kodesh would travel, right? The Levium would carry it, it had to be carried, but the Gemara tells us that the Aron Kodesh would carry those who carried it. The Aron Kodesh would literally elevate itself. So here, the Aron Kodesh elevated itself. The wagon slipped out from underneath it. Uzzah, who didn't understand what was going on, reached out, touched the Aron Kodesh, and was killed. Right? And and David HaMelech was distressed over what happened and ultimately realized that this was punishment. In other words, Kadosh Baruch Hu said to him, every school child knows that it was the job of the Levium to carry the Aron Kodesh and not for the Aron Kodesh to go in wagons. Other parts of Shevet Levi took things in wagons, but those who were responsible for the Aron Kodesh had to carry it. Every school child knows that. But because you were arrogant, David, because you were haughty, because you said that my chukim are like zmiros to you, so this is what happened. Now, wait a second. We're confronted with a philosophical problem. I'm heading off Tina at the past. We're confronted with a philosophical problem. And wait a second. Uzzah was killed because David HaMelech made a mistake. Right? In other words, David HaMelech was punished, I understand, but because David HaMelech was punished, did Uzzah need to be killed? So obviously the Meforshim grapple with this idea, and they say that Uzzah was killed for something else. It was just used as the lesson for David HaMelech. Chas v'shalom that Uzzah would be killed for a transgression of David HaMelech. No, Uzzah was to be killed for something else. All right? Uzzah did act disrespectfully towards the Aron Kodesh, and Uzzah was, as a result of that, killed, even though his intentions were good, even though his instinct was good, right? Nevertheless, sometimes instinct and intentions don't prevent us from transgressing, and that's what happened to Uzzah, and Uzzah was killed, but it wasn't because of David HaMelech. In other words, it wasn't that it was orchestrated, that Uzzah's death was orchestrated as a result of David HaMelech. Okay.
One question.
Yes.
Well, Uzzah, his father, Nadav, housed, kept the, right? I mean, they behaved respectfully.
No, they did behave respectfully, and Avinadav was rewarded handsomely. He was rewarded handsomely by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for this, for all the time that the Aron Kodesh spent. Aron Kodesh spent 20 years there, 20 years in Kiryas Yiraim. Right, the Aron Kodesh was there for 20 years in the house of Avinadav, and he was blessed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the respect that he showed towards the Aron Kodesh. But people make mistakes. Go ahead.
One could also argue that David's initial transgression or arrogance could be interpreted, your chukim are like Zmirot. I could see a midrash that said, what a wonderful thing. That
Yeah, correct.
Are like
Right, and we learned that last week. We learned that last week that there are multiple ways to interpret most things. And yes, it is possible to interpret the fact what David HaMelech said, your chukim are like zmiros to me. Like I could interpret that to say that's positive, right? Zmiros are soulful, right? Zmiros are inspirational, right? Zmiros are soothing, right? Zmiros are a way we serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? So I could clearly make that connection, all right? But obviously, there's a Mesorah that the Medrash says Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't necessarily view it that way. Now remember, as I mentioned at the beginning of last week, there are multiple explanations for why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know this halacha. This is only one of them, right? This is one of them. Rashi mentions this, other Mefarshim mention this, the Medrash mentions it, the Gemara mentions it. It's not like it's like a little known explanation. Right? It's a very widely known explanation, but it is only one of those explanations. Obviously, the Torah doesn't tell us why Moshe Rabbeinu brought this to Hashem. Our initial approach is he brought it to Hashem because he didn't know the answer. And if he didn't know the answer, why didn't he know the answer? This doesn't seem to be so complicated. And it doesn't seem to be so complicated, especially because Beno Slavcha figured out the answer. So we have to, right? So we have to say what? We have to say that Moshe didn't know it because he was punished. That's one approach. We're going to learn other approaches today. Raylene, go ahead.
It is complicated because further on in the text, we learn that the daughters have qualifiers on their permission and nobody took into account the Jubilee year. And people did.
Please repeat the question.
Yes, I will.
So it is and also how much did they inherit? Because if their father got two, if their grandfather got two portions, how much land went down to the
Right. So Raylene is suggesting that it's not so clear.
It's not
right?
so
Right.
clear.
Raylene is suggesting that, she's saying, wait a second, maybe the reason Moshe had to go to a Kadosh Baruch Hu was because there were a lot of variables here that needed to be taken into account. And maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was not able to figure them out. And we're going to head in a similar direction in a second. We're going to head in a similar direction. Tina, go
I
ahead.
just find it hard to understand if the Aron Kodesh was in a house for 20 years, that the family did not know the stringencies, the laws pertaining to the Aron Kodesh. It wasn't as if it just popped in. There had to be some sort of, derech that they.
So yes, so no, there's no question. And Uzzah grew up in that environment. There's no question about it. But even if you grow up in a particular environment, and even if you're accustomed to certain things, there still could be an instinctive, intuitive kind of reaction that needs to be controlled. Halacha is about controlling our impulsive actions. Uzzah's action was impulsive, right? And it ultimately resulted in his death. All right, I just want to pause for just a second and extend a very special welcome to Brenda Barber, right? Why? Because Brenda arrived in Israel literally a few hours ago, I think, and is able already, has internet and able to join us. Brenda, wonderful to have you with us. Everybody else here, anybody else who arrived recently anywhere within the last few hours and you're exhausted, I'll also give you a shout out. Good to have you. Okay, so let's go. So that's one explanation. You didn't know, that was one explanation. Here's another explanation. And this explanation is, as they say, pink fakert or punk fakert, depending upon where you come from. It's at the opposite end of the spectrum. And what is that? That Moshe Rabbeinu absolutely knew the halacha. He knew it. So if he knew it, why did he go to Kadosh Baruch Hu? Why didn't he just say it? So according to this explanation, which is a fascinating explanation as well, that Benos Tzolofchad worked their way up the food chain of Psak Halacha. They had a question. So first they went to the lower Beis Din, then to the higher Beis Din, then to the higher Beis Din, then to the higher. So what happened? So do you remember when Yisro gave the advice to Moshe Rabbeinu as to how to structure this? So Yisro says to Moshe Rabbeinu that you're supposed to choose the atah. Right? These are all the requirements to be dayanim. You have to be strong, you have to be God-fearing, you have to be truthful, you have to hate gain. Right? V'samta alehem, and place over the people sarei alafim. What are sarei alafim? Officers of 1,000. Right? So every 1,000 people will have one dayan. This dayan will be responsible for these 1,000 people. And then sarei me'os. And then what? Within that 1,000 people grouping, there will be 10 dayanim, each one in charge of 100 people. And then sarei chamishim, and within that same grouping, there will be one dayan in charge of each 50 group of people. So you have 250, right? You see the chart, right? You can make the chart in your head going up. And finally, Visarei Asarot, that there will be one dayan in charge of every 10 people. So people had incredible access, right? If you were among those 10, you had the dayan. This was your dayan. This was your posek. This is who you went to, right? And if he didn't know, what did he do? He kicked it up to the dayan of 50. And if the dayan of 50 didn't know, he kicked it up to the dayan of 100. And if the dayan of 100 didn't know, he kicked it up to the dayan of 1,000. And that's precisely what Benos Salavcha did. First, they went to their local person, right? I don't know, their local assembly person, I guess. I don't know the correct comparison, but they went to their local person, and their local person didn't know. So then they went up to the dayan of the 50, then the dayan of the 100, then the dayan of 1,000, and then ultimately they came to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why didn't the dayan of 10 know? Why didn't the dayan of 100 know? Why didn't the dayan of 1,000 know? What's the kunz here, right? So they said this is a decision that is going to have perpetual impact, right? That's going to have ramifications for eternity, right? It's one thing to decide Ruvain claims Shimon owes him $10. Okay, that's one thing to decide. But here we're talking about deciding matters of inheritance that are going to be incorporated into the body of halacha. That's beyond our pay grade.
And women.
For sure. So what happened? So the judges of 10 passed on it, and it went up to the judges of 50, and the judges of 50 also passed, and the judges of 100 also passed, and the judges of 1,000 also passed. So it came to Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu knew the halacha, but what? But Moshe Rabbeinu said, whoa, wait a second. The judges of 10 showed derech eretz and kavod to the judges of 50. The judges of 50 showed derech eretz and kavod by asking the judges of 100. The judges of 100 showed derech eretz and kavod by asking the judges of 1,000. The judges of 1,000 showed derech eretz and kavod by coming to me. I'm going to just tell them what the halacha is? No. What am I going to do? I'm going to show them that they did the right thing, because derech eretz and kavod say, go to someone who is more knowledgeable than you. So even though Moshe Rabbeinu knew the halacha, what did he do? He went to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He went to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to model for all of the other dayanim, for all of the people, that if you're not sure, you show derech eretz and kavod, and you bring it to a higher authority, so to speak. Okay, so this is the exact opposite of saying that Moshe Rabbeinu was punished because of the tinge of haughtiness. This is just the opposite. This is saying that Moshe Rabbeinu was setting an example for Klal Yisrael. He set an example for Klal Yisrael of how one should behave. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu did. He brought it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to say what? In order to say, wow, this is what you do. I'm teaching Bnei Yisrael a lesson. Okay? Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes. Go ahead, Beverly. Hi, Betty. Go ahead, Beverly.
But in reality, they didn't know what the decision was, because this was a new situation that they were confronting. The laws of inheritance didn't exactly describe this situation.
Well, I'm not sure that that's true. You know, what was the taina that Benos Salavcha brought before Moshe? Benos Salavcha said to Moshe, if a son who's a child is able to inherit his deceased father's estate, so then why can't a daughter who also obviates the need for yibum or chalitza, why can't a daughter also inherit her father's estate? In other words, it seems to be very clear. It seems to be a very clear halacha, right? That's not a. We're not talking about the inequity of a daughter not being able to inherit if a son is present. We're not talking about that inequity. We'll get there. And you'll see maybe it's not such an inequity, but we'll get there. All right, but here we're talking about there were no sons. So if there were no sons, it's almost a non-brainer, or what's it called, a no-brainer. It's almost a no-brainer that this daughter should inherit. So Beverly, so that's what I'm saying. I'm not so sure that it was.
But in the past, they made a point of saying that these daughters were thoughtful and educated and observant, righteous,
Right,
and
correct.
all the good adjectives.
Correct.
But so this was a slightly different situation, and they were also mature.
Correct.
And had
They
put off their marriages, their possible marriages. This was a differently framed situation.
So you're
I
correct.
think,
You're
than
you're
that
correct. But according to this, I mean, according so far to all of the opinions, this was something that Moshe Rabbeinu understood. We will come across an opinion in a few moments of something that maybe made it more complicated. Maybe something that Moshe Rabbeinu could not have understood. So we'll get there. Okay.
One
Okay.
quick question, I'm so sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Rosie.
I'm looking here in Perek Vav, I don't want to take the time, but I can't find it, but I think it was like Kiryat Yearim, maybe Uraim is in the Gemara, I don't know. But I'm looking here with the
Is
Agalah.
it?
Perek Vav, well, Aleph, you don't have to do it now.
Okay,
you know,
I'll look at
but
it. I'll
yeah,
look at it.
I
I'll
think
look
it's
at it. You have to look in Shmuel.
with an iron. Is it your Ephraim that lives there?
Yes.
It's-
Is it your Ephraim? Oh.
It's
well,
Sonia's Ephraim. Yes, Sonia's Ephraim. Okay. All right. I
As
want to
opposed
go. Okay. All right. Let's go. I want to go to yet another interpretation, a fascinating interpretation suggested by Rabbeinu Bachya, ultimately rejected by Rabbeinu Bachya. But I think it's a great interpretation. Okay. And what is that? So listen to this. First of all, by the way, Rabbeinu Bachya. Did you ever hear the name Rabbeinu Bachya?
Yeah.
All right. Is it Rabbeinu Bachya or is it Rabbeinu Bechaye?
Bachya ibn Petuel.
Okay, so this is a fascinating discussion. Fascinating discussion. I've grappled with this for a very long time, and I decided finally I decided I was going to research it to try to figure it out. There are two Rabbeinu Beis Ches Yud Yud. Right? Beis Ches Yud Yud. Right? How do you pronounce that? I would pronounce it as Bechaye, but there are people who pronounce it as Bachya. Okay? There is a Bachya, I'm going to say Bachya for now. There is a Bachya ben Asher, who is the Mefaresh that we're referring to now. He's Rabbeinu Bachya or Rabbeinu Bechaye on Chumash. He died in approximately the year 1340. And then there is a Rabbeinu Bachya or Bechaye ibn Pakuda, who is not a commentator on Chumash. He was a philosopher. Not in Poland. No. He wrote the Chovos HaLevavos, right? The Chovos HaLevavos. I don't think he was in Poland. The Chovos HaLevavos, and he died a century earlier. Right? He died a century earlier. Right? Probably, right? So, or Spain, right? So these were, it was, right, Bachya ibn Pakuda, who's the philosopher, and Bachya ben Asher, who's the commentary. Rosie, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, I got it.
Okay, all right. So we're referring to Rabbeinu Bachya or Bechaye. There are different ways of pronouncing it. Some say Ashkenazim pronounce it Bechaye, and Sephardim pronounce it Bachya. All different interpretations as to how this name is pronounced. There's even a fascinating suggestion that it's not really a name, that it was a nickname that was given to connote long life. So it should be Bechaye, as you know. Anyway, and be that as it may, it doesn't share this. Listen to this. What a great, beautiful insight. Rabbeinu Bachya or Bechaye, or whatever you want to call him, suggests that Moshe Rabbeinu needed to disqualify himself from Paskin here. Why? So we know that there are times where a judge needs to recuse himself from a case when there's a conflict of interest. a judge recuses himself from a case. What possible conflict of interest could there have been that would have resulted in Moshe Rabbeinu not being able to paskin because he needed to recuse himself from this case? So
Were
listen.
they related? Maybe they were related.
How are they related? I don't know. They're related? I don't know. Sonia, you have an idea, Sonia? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think because he was male.
Because he was male. Very, very interesting, right? So Sonia is disqualifying not only Moshe Rabbeinu, but every single other judge, right? Because all of the judges were male at the time, right? But listen to what he suggests. It's a fascinating suggestion. Then whose father-in-law?
Israel only have daughters.
I don't know. Man, I'm not sure. She had five daughters. I'm not sure if he had any sons.
Or maybe with the Nachalah.
Oh, but listen. It's great. It's great. Listen to what he says, all right? He says, remember what Beno Slavchad said when they first came to Moshe Rabbeinu? What did they say? Avinu meis bamidbar. Our father died in the midbar. He wasn't part of Korach.
Right.
He
Who's
didn't
his
die.
relative. Right.
He didn't
Right.
die as part of the rebellion against you, Moshe Rabbeinu.
Right.
Because the rebellion of Korach was a rebellion against Moshe and Aaron. So Beno Slavchad are saying to Moshe, our father didn't die as a result of the rebellion against you. He had no part in that rebellion. He would not have stepped foot in that shul. He had no part of the rebellion against you. What did Moshe Rabbeinu hear when they said this? Moshe Rabbeinu said, I can't paskin this. Why not? Because they're flattering me. Right? Because it might be shochad, it might be considered flattery or bribery. Shochad is bribery, right? In other words, they're flattering me. They're saying, our father never would have, if our father had lived, he never would have been part of that rebellion against you. Moshe Rabbeinu hears that, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can't deal with this.
They didn't want him to be prejudiced against him originally, because they're saying, don't judge us if you think our father was involved with that rebellion, because he had nothing to do with that. He sinned differently.
Right, correct. But Moshe Rabbeinu heard that.
But they weren't, he didn't hear.
They didn't say it as bribery. They didn't say it as flattery. They were saying it for their own self-interest.
Exactly, they didn't
But
want him to rule against them.
But according to Rabbeinu Bachya, what? Moshe Rabbeinu heard this, and Moshe Rabbeinu said to himself, a dayan needs to avoid any shmek. What's a shmek? An odor, a smell, a tinge, right? Any shmek of impropriety. Right? Avak, right? Avak lashon hara, avak ribis. Any tinge of impropriety. And since they began the conversation by saying to me, what? They began the conversation by saying to me, our father never would have been part of that. Moshe Rabbeinu said, can't do it. And Moshe Rabbeinu would bring this to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Thelma, go ahead. Thelma.
Since last week when you said maybe a tinge of arrogance from Moshe Rabbeinu, a whole week I've been like, it can't be. It was so unsettling.
All right, Baruch Hashem. I hope I calmed you down a little bit. Betty,
No,
yes.
because, so enough. Moshe
Wait,
needs
Thelma,
to-
hold on. Hang on just a second. Betty, go ahead.
Doesn't make the ruling more important if it's coming from Hashem.
So Betty's suggesting yet another completely different answer, right? And that answer says, even if Moshe Rabbeinu knew it, it gives the ruling the good housekeeping stamp of approval if it comes from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Beverly, gosh, Betty, you could do that. You could do that. You don't know how hard I have to work to edit these videos, right? You could do that. You could make that argument with every single law. Why specifically this law? You could make that argument with every single law.
Well, this type of inheritance is going to waste. But this type of ruling is
Right,
going
but remember, every law came from Hashem. Moshe didn't make up anything. Every law came from Hashem. So we need to figure out another way. I thought Rabbeinu Bachya's approach that he rejects is great. I thought it was very, very powerful. How careful a judge needs to be to avoid any appearance of impropriety.
Or that it's true.
I Why did
What?
he
More
reject?
that are true today.
Were that true today? Were that true today? We wouldn't have any judges.
Or another judicial word.
Go ahead, Rosie. What?
Shayachus. Shayachus, another judicial word.
Shayachus.
He was- Yeah, and also Korach was his cousin, you know.
Yes, we know that. We know that. Okay.
But why did he reject it? Why did he reject this idea?
Because Rabbeinu Bachya rejected it in favor of the two other approaches, meaning the approach that suggests he basically went with the majority, who say either Moshe Rabbeinu was punished because he didn't know the halacha, or he was punished because of the tinge of haughtiness, or he knew the halacha, but he wanted to teach a lesson to Bnei Yisrael. Rabbeinu Bachya, goes along with those, with those two. Why? Maybe he felt that that what Beno Slavchat said was not enough of it. Right? They were saying it as Raylene said to themselves, having nothing to do with Moshe. It could be. Okay. Explanation number 4. Explanation number 4. This is a little bit complicated. Okay?
Think we can handle it?
I'm worried about whether I can explain it properly. I'm saying that to give myself an out, right? Whether I can explain it properly. Okay, so we have as follows, okay? How many, by the way, interestingly, we've made reference to this before, that the tribe of Menashe was divided up into 2 sections, one on the eastern side of the Jordan River with Reuven and Gad, and one on the western side of the Jordan River in Eretz Yisrael proper at the time, which was with everyone else. Menashe had seemingly 7 sons. The son Machir, who was known as the Gibor. Machir, his family got the section on the other side of the Jordan River, right? On the eastern side of the Jordan River. That left Menashe's 6 other sons to divide up the land on the western side of the Jordan River. Menashe's chelek on the western side of the Jordan River, in Eretz Yisrael proper. Okay, and the pasuk in Yehoshua tells us the names of these 6 sons. But Yehoshua also tells us that Menashe's land was divided up into 10 portions. 10 portions. So it was divided up into 10 portions. There were 6 sons who got the other portions. So the Gemara there's a Gemara in Maseches Baba Basra. The Gemara in Maseches Baba Basra says that the remaining portions went to Benos Tzalafchad. So let's understand how the land was distributed. Did Menashe leave Mitzrayim? Was Menashe among those who left Mitzrayim? This is not a trick question. You just have to think about it. Was Menashe among those who left Mitzrayim? Was Menashe part of Yetzias Mitzrayim? No, obviously not. Why? Because all of the Shvatim died in Mitzrayim. In fact, the Shibud didn't begin until all of the Shvatim died. So Menashe didn't leave Mitzrayim. So who must have left Mitzrayim? Menashe's children left Mitzrayim. Menashe's 7 sons left Mitzrayim. So those 7 sons were each entitled to divide up Menashe's land. In other words, they were each entitled to a portion in the area that would be prophetically distributed to Menashe, to Shevet Menashe.
Why do you say he didn't leave Mitzrayim?
Because he died in Mitzrayim. He was dead.
Menashe died in Mitzrayim.
All of the Shvatim died
Forgot it, the generation.
Machir was one of the seven?
Machir was one of the seven, correct. Machir was one of the seven. Yes.
East side.
One son got chelek in.
So it seems from Sefer Yehoshua that one of them got the chelek, the entirety of the chelek on the eastern side. What?
Why does it say?
Because the land was divided up into geographically into relatively 50%. Each one was 50-50, so to speak. Right? And Machir got this bigger section of land. Okay, now, let's drill down. Okay, so there were 7 sons who left Mitzrayim. Now, those 7 sons who left Mitzrayim, either they, if they were still alive, I'll do it slowly. If they were still alive when they came into Eretz Yisrael, each of those sons would get a portion of that land. How much each son would get would depend on there were 2 opinions. We said either they got equal share. In other words, each one of them would get 1/6 of the territory, and then they would have to divide up that 1/6 of the territory amongst all of their families, or they were allotted portions based on their family's population. We said there were 2 different opinions to that. But what happened to all 6 of these? What happened to all 6 of these? They died in the midbar. They died in the midbar because they were of the right? They were above 20. They died in the midbar. Right? So who got their land? Their descendants. So all the descendants of Machir went to the land on the eastern side of the Jordan River. All of the descendants of the other 6 got the land got their father's piece. Where?
The west side.
On the west side of the Jordan River. Okay? Now, who were these 6 sons of Menashe? Aviezer, Chelek, Asriel, Shechem, Chefer, and Shemidah.
What was that list?
You don't need to know all of these. This is not a test. You don't need to know all of these names. It's all right. You could look in Sefer Yehoshua, Perek Yud Zayin, Psukim Beis through Hey. It's all there. Okay?
Right.
We don't have to go through. What's important
Like real estate names.
What's important is that one of them was named Chefer. Chefer was entitled to a piece of land, to a portion of the land in Eretz Yisrael. And what's interesting is that Chefer's children were also among Yotzei Mitzrayim. In other words, it wasn't just Chefer who was among those who left Egypt, but Chefer's children were among those who were part of Yetzias Mitzrayim. One of Chefer's sons' names we know. Who was that? Tzolofchad. Tzolofchad was the son of Chefer. So, Chefer was entitled to a portion. Tzolofchad was entitled to a portion. Chefer's brothers were entitled to a portion. Any male sons or any sons that they had alive at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim were also entitled to portions. And any of Tzolofchad's brothers were entitled to portions. So it wasn't just the land of Menashe divided up into 7 portions. The land of Menashe was divided up into many more than 7 portions, depending on how many left Mitzrayim, right? Whoever was alive from Shevet Menashe when the Jews left Egypt, they were entitled to a portion in the land if they survived, which they didn't, or their descendants were entitled to their portion in the land.
So that means Menashe was the only one who was alive of the tribes?
No, Menashe wasn't alive.
He wasn't.
Menashe wasn't alive.
Passed away.
All the
passed
brothers passed away.
away. Did they-
These are the descendants. These are the descendants of the brothers. Right? These are the descendants of the brothers.
We
Right?
Zoomers are so better behaved here.
Wait a second. I have a hard time hearing one person at a time. Wait a second. Rosie, what were you saying?
No, I just said that the Zoomers are goody-goody two-shoes. We're very well behaved compared to your two-person group.
All right, listen. It is. We're trying. I said it's complicated, and if it's complicated, it's because I'm not explaining it well. So focus on me. Give me another chance, Tina. All right, here we go. Focus here. Let's go. So what do we say? Okay. So every male who walked out of Mitzrayim was entitled to a portion of their tribe's land in Israel, or for Menashe on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Every male who walked out was entitled to a portion of their shevet's property when they got to Israel. Okay? So we're focusing specifically on our topic here. Okay? So Chefer was the grandfather of these girls, right? Right? So these girls were their father was Salafchad, their grandfather was Chefer. Was Chefer alive when they came into Eretz Yisrael? No. So these girls are entitled to what? To a portion of Chefer as representatives of the descendants of Chefer. There were many other descendants of Chefer, right, who were also entitled to portions, but they were entitled to a portion that came from Chefer. That's how I want to characterize it. It was a portion that came from Chefer. It wasn't all of Chefer's portion. Chefer's portion was divided up among all of his male heirs, right? Among all of his male heirs, who were Salafchad and his brothers, right? Just like other children who didn't live to come into Eretz Yisrael, their portion was divided up among their brothers and their heirs. Okay, so the girls were entitled to one portion that came from Chefer.
Right.
Okay, fine, good. Everybody got that? Good. Now, the girls were entitled to another portion that came from whom? Their father Tzalafchad. Because Tzalafchad also walked out of Mitzrayim. So since Tzalafchad walked out of Mitzrayim, he was also entitled to a portion of the land. Okay? So his father, Chefer, was entitled to a portion of the land, and Tzalafchad was entitled to a portion of the land. Chefer died. What happened to Chefer's portions of the land? They went to his male heirs, meaning Tzalafchad now has his own portion and his share of his father's portion in the land. So Tzalafchad has two portions, right? Tzalafchad has two portions. And
But
now,
isn't his portion part, a subset of his father's
no,
portion?
because he has his own portion because he walked out of the land, and then he has his father's portion because he is an heir to his father. And when his father died, a portion of his father's claim to the land goes to Tzalafchad. It was also split among Tzalafchad's brothers. But Tzalafchad has his own piece, and then he has a piece from his father Chefer. Okay? So the girls
Not left with much.
the girls are entitled to, right now Tzalafchad dies, so Tzalafchad is passing on to his male heirs, if he had them, right? two portions. Now, these are not identical portions. When I say two portions, they're not identical portions. Obviously, Chefer's portion is much smaller because Chefer's portion was divided among, it was shared among the 5 brothers. So it's smaller than, but it was 2 portions. We're gonna call it 2 portions just for clarity. Okay? So if Tzolofchad had male descendants, had sons, then they would have inherited Tzolofchad's portion, and they would have inherited Chefer's portion as well. Okay? Now it gets even more complicated. Okay, why? Because Tzolofchad had brothers.
Right.
And Tzolofchad had a brother who died childless. So what happens to that brother? We'll call him brother X. What happened to that brother also walked out of Egypt. So what happened to that brother's portion? It doesn't just disappear. Where does it go? It gets divided among all of his siblings. So Tzolofchad now has 3 portions. His own portion, because Tzolofchad walked out of Egypt. His father's portion, or Tzolofchad's share of his father's portion, because his father walked out of Egypt. And Tzolofchad's share of his brother who died childless's portion, because that brother walked out of Egypt. So Tzolofchad has 3 shares. So Tzolofchad's daughters are going to inherit 3 shares. That's clear. There's no question about that. From the laws of inheritance, if there are no sons, daughters inherit. Clear as day. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that. Benos Tzolofchad knew that, according to this opinion. Right? Remember, this is yet a 4th opinion as to why Moshe was bringing this. Benos Tzolofchad knew this. Moshe Rabbeinu knew this. Everybody knew this. The guy in the Makolet knew this. Everybody knew this was the halacha. What was Moshe not sure about? So listen to this. Tzolofchad was the Bechor. Tzolofchad was the firstborn of Chefer.
So he should get double.
What's the halacha by a Bechor?
He
has to get double.
The Bechor is supposed to get double. Right? The Bechor, the firstborn, is supposed to get double. Except, listen to this halacha. The Bechor is only entitled to double of what was in his father's estate when his father died. He's only entitled to double of what was in his father's estate when his father died. Was the land of Israel in his father's estate when his father died?
Well, it depends how you explain it.
Thank you, Tina. Depends on how you view it. There are those who said everybody who walked out of the land of Israel everyone who walked out of Egypt claimed a portion in the land of Israel, and because it was Israel and because this was promised to them by Hashem, it was as if they had it at that time. The halachic terminology for that is muchzak, from the word chazaka, right? Muchzak. It was as if they had it at that time. If that's the case, then Tzolofchad was entitled to a double portion, and the daughters stand to inherit 4 portions. 1 portion which comes from Tzolofchad because he walked out of the land out of Egypt. 1 portion which comes from Tzolofchad's father, who also walked out of the land of Egypt. A 2nd portion which comes from Tzolofchad's father, another portion which comes from Salafchad's brother who died childless, and one final portion because Salafchad was the Bechor. So he got 2 portions from his father. On the other hand, perhaps we say, wait a second. It's true that they were promised the land of Israel, but they didn't have the land of Israel. So it's not muchzak, it's called ra'ui. In other words, it was going to be theirs, potential, but it wasn't yet theirs. The Bechor doesn't get a double portion of potential. The Bechor doesn't get a double portion of ra'ui. The Bechor only gets a double portion of muchzak, only gets a double portion of there. So based on this, how many portions would Beno Salafchad have gotten? 3. And Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know. He didn't know whether the land of Israel, vis-a-vis those who walked out of Egypt, was considered in the halachic category of muchzak or considered in the halachic category of ra'ui. He didn't know whether it was considered the halachic category of actually possessing it, muchzak, or the halachic category of potential possession, ra'ui. That would have ramifications as to whether or not Beno Salafchad got 4 portions or 3 portions. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu brought to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know that daughters inherit if there's no sons. Duh. Everybody knows that. It was that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't sure whether they got 4 portions or 3 portions. And that's what he brought to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Fascinating, right?
Who
right?
said that again? Not Tafia. Who said that?
That's the Gemara in Maseches Baba Basra. Right? It's Gemara Maseches Baba Basra, Kuf Yud Tes, I think. Okay,
Is
Kuf
this
Yud
why
Tes.
the lower? is
Beverly,
this why
yes.
Is this why the lower courts couldn't make the decision?
Could be,
Did they
I don't know
realize
that opinion that says that it went through the lower courts. I don't know. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe or not. I don't know. Maybe you're right. I'm not sure. It's not clear. But anyway, so we have simple answers. Moshe Rabbeinu was being punished because of the tinge of haughtiness. We have a simple answer, and when I say simple, I don't mean simple as opposed to simple is profound also, right? That Moshe Rabbeinu was being punished as a result of the tinge of haughtiness.
Transparent.
Right? We have an answer that Moshe Rabbeinu knew what the halacha was, but he was setting an example for everybody else. We have an answer that Moshe Rabbeinu knew what the halacha was, but he didn't want to paskin because he thought that it might be misinterpreted, that there was some connection, some impropriety. And finally, we have an answer that Moshe Rabbeinu really didn't know what the halacha was. Not because he was punished, just because this was a question that had never been dealt with before. And whether it was muchzak or ra'ui, what halachic category did it fit in? And Moshe Rabbeinu brought that to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Go ahead, Sue.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Wait, no, let me, go ahead, Tina, go quickly, go ahead.
Why don't you go?
Yes.
Okay. I have 2 questions, which probably means 2 extra classes, but
Can't hear them.
I'm uneasy with primogeniture. It's fine.
Tina's uneasy with the fact that the Bechor inherits double. We're not going to deal with that
I
today.
know, I said. It's
Good.
for another
Next
day.
question.
Oh, next question.
I'm uneasy that they called them part, dig, and sell. Those are their names.
Go ahead.
I don't want to know who gets Central Park. That's what I
There was a tradition of if let's say Yaakov passed away.
Don't close your, I have one more great thing to share with you. Go ahead.
Yaakov passed away and his bones were brought to Eretz Yisrael.
Right. The other brothers know. The other brothers know.
And they'll say too, that he made them promise. he
Correct.
left them-
Correct.
What? The others are buried in Egypt, they left them behind?
Okay, let's go. I'm not going. Okay, let's go. Last thing, look at the pasuk. Look inside Chumash. Look at this pasuk. Look at this pasuk inside Chumash. That Moshe Rabbeinu brought this before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's something that should stick out. And what is that? The word mishpatan. If you look at the word mishpatan in Hebrew, what do you see? Do you have the pasuk? Anybody have the pasuk in front of them? I don't want to spend the time. What? A big nun. What pasuk is it?
Hey.
Pasuk Hey. It's Pasuk Hey. All right, I don't want to waste the time going through. The word mishpatan has a large nun at the end of it. Why? Why does it have a large nun at the end? Interesting, Nekeva, interesting, right? I mean, it should have a nun because Mishpatan is Nekeva, but why is it enlarged? Why is it enlarged? All right, so listen to this. Listen to this. What's the gematria of nun? 50. The gematria of nun is 50. How many levels of knowledge are there?
7.
50 levels of knowledge. There are 50 levels of tuma, and there are 50 levels of tahara, which correspond to the 50 levels of knowledge. Now, don't ask me to explain the difference between level 2 and level 3, okay? But how many days of Sfiras HaOmer are there? 49. Why are there 49 days from Yetzias Mitzrayim until Shavuos? Because in Mitzrayim, Bnei Yisrael had sunken to the 49th level of Tuma. If they had been allowed to stay in Mitzrayim any longer, they would have been irredeemable. Kadosh Baruch Hu brought them out on the 49th level of Tuma, and they needed to crawl their way back up. There are 49 levels of Tahara as well, 49 levels of wisdom. The Nun symbolizes the 50th level of wisdom. That 50th level of wisdom, there is a machlokes as to whether or not Moshe Rabbeinu achieved that 50th level of wisdom. Because that's the level of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? In other words, that's you can't go higher than 50.
So that's perfection.
Right? You can't go higher than 50. So it could be that 50 goes from here to here. Kadosh Baruch Hu was over here. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was over here. We're not suggesting that Moshe Rabbeinu achieved the knowledge of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. But Moshe Rabbeinu achieved the greatest perfection possible for a human being. So there are those who say, yes, he did. And the nun is elongated to emphasize that, meaning that Moshe Rabbeinu clearly knew the answer. And why didn't he tell them? Because he wanted to teach a lesson to Bnei Yisrael. He wanted to teach that even when you know the answer, it's derech eretz to ask. Right? That's one interpretation. The second interpretation is no, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't reach that 50th level. Had he reached that 50th level, he would have known the answer and he would have told them. But because he didn't reach that 50th level, he didn't know the answer. And that's why he came to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Both extremes sort of symbolized in this elongated nun. Okay, next week, Chevra, we're starting the laws of inheritance. Right? We're going to actually, I don't know that we're going to get to it next week, we're going to go through a ksuba, word for word, so that you know exactly what your husband signed on to.
I'm coming to class.
The standard, we're using a standard. I'm not using any particular ksubos. All right, I'm going to use a standard Ashkenazi ksuba. The ideas are the same. We'll talk a little bit. There's some differences between Sephardic ksubos and Ashkenazi ksubos, but we'll do that all in the laws of inheritance as we try to unpack this. Everybody have a great week.